Welcome back to Natural 2, our D&D and tabletop role-playing talk show where we discuss vastly different nerdy things in this fun little hobby of ours. We now have a new Unearthed Arcana article for the new OneD&D playtest. We have been eagerly awaiting more after the first initial drop that I think left us with more questions than answers. So we now have a much denser playtest article sent our way for the community to chew over and discuss, and we are going to go over the highlights of the things that kind of grabbed our attention on our first read. So James, what would be the first thing that kind of, I don't know, jogged your noggin?
Well, the very first thing is welcome back from the Shadow Realm.
Thank you. It
Uh,
was a very long adventure here. I hope I got a level up.
and the second thing is completely frivolous and not at all related to the material. It just struck me funny and really distracted me a couple times. The poor guy who was pretending to interview Jeremy Crawford.
Yeah.
I don't want to pick on him too much because I'm sure he's a cool guy
Hmm.
and weird things happen on camera. I know that. You know, I've certainly watched myself on Natural 2 and been like, who is this ogre that is in this video? So more power to him. But sometimes they would cut to his face and I don't know why. They would cut to his face and he would just be sitting there like,
Jeremy was probably like picking his nose or something, and they just cut to the other guy.
I like feats. And then they'd go back to Jeremy Crawford. And it's like, I understand that he's only there to give Crawford something to look at, for goodness sake. And they didn't even mic him. Crawford
Mm.
has a lav mic that they didn't give that guy anything other than what was, I don't know, maybe in the studio or
I
something.
wonder
You
if they
could
told him
tell,
that like he wasn't even going to be on camera, so he was just kind of chilling there.
like they started out just having Crawford talk to the camera, and he's like, "I can't do this. I need somebody to, I need somebody to look at. You get over here." Like, so that just struck me funny as I was watching
Mm.
this latest round of videos. Like, this poor guy. Anyway,
To the actual content.
now that that's out of the way, the actual first thing is the death, hopefully, of the weird uh critical hit change and automatic success and failure on 20s and ones across the board.
Hmm.
Um I think it was one of the first things they mentioned in their own videos too, which is like we just put it in there to see what would happen, and everybody
Hmm.
hated it, so it's gone.
Yeah.
Uh Even though Crawford was sort of leaving the door open for it to come back, like, oh yeah, over the course of the playtest, things will go out, they'll come back, they'll go out. Nah, man, leave that one out.
Yeah.
You had your fun with that little prank on the D&D player base.
I think the little conspiracy that was going around last time where people were like, oh, they just put it in there so we get all inflamed about it. I think it's a little bit true because I imagine that what we got in this version is the actual rule they were trying to implement with Nat 1 giving you inspiration. And so they were trying to use the last Unearthed Arcana article to kind of like, I don't know, get us all up in arms. Now we're like, oh, well, we retrieved some of the cherished memories that we want. It's kind of the feeling that I got, but I think this is the actual rule they wanted to put in versus what they put in last time.
At first, I thought like, well, what's the difference with the inspiration on a nat one?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's still the same probability of happening,
Mm-hmm.
and so I thought like, what difference does it make? But now that I've had some time to think it over, it's kind of spreading things out because enough good things are happening on a 20 that you really don't need one more.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing good happens on a 1 except now potentially you get inspiration, so yeah, that's your consolation prize.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I'm not super excited about where they're taking inspiration. I think it's fundamentally changing from what we're used to it being, where it used to be a tool that the DM kind of exclusively had access to. Now it seems like it's more of a baked-in mechanic that players can expect and rely on. And I don't know. I'm not a huge fan, but I'm not gonna like cry about it. It's okay. We'll see where it goes. I'm open to it being better in this direction, but I'm not sure.
I suspect that in the variety of surveys that they've done over the years, a lot of players have probably said, "Inspiration, what's that?"
Yeah, yeah.
Or my DM never uses it. He never remembers to
Hmm.
give it to us.
Or
Or
only gives it to that one girl in our group that he's really trying to get the number of.
right,
Yeah.
something like that. So
Hmm.
trying to make that more of a thing. Um, and I get it.
Hmm.
Uh, I kind of feel like I hope that it's not that it doesn't become too commonplace is I guess my thing. And I feel
Hmm.
like that was sort of the problem. The weirdest thing about giving it to humans just every in-game day
Hmm.
is um it should feel like I feel like it should be more of in case of emergency, break glass kind of thing, as opposed
Hmm.
to this resource now that you are, oh, got to make sure to use this before we rest.
Or you can like actually plan a specific, I guess, tactic around where previously it was this kind of like oh shit kind of thing.
Like every time I want to use this ability or cast this spell, I'm going to use my inspiration on it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're taking that a different direction. I'm open to it being okay, but I'm skeptical. But the biggest change with all of this, which we're not going to be able to touch on everything, are the classes. That's the main focus of this. And there's so many things that they're like, it looks like they're kind of trying to shift the attitude or the attention or the, I guess, the design of certain classes or even like how they work at like the fundamental level, which is cool to see. I mentioned to you before we started recording, and this is probably my biggest thing to say overall about the classes, at least at like a kind of quick viewing is I'm not a huge fan of classes kind of getting the abilities of other classes, especially in the core skill set. Like if a subclass kind of dips into another class's territory, that's a little bit easier to come to terms with because there's more room there. But everybody is taking the core class skill set if they're taking that class. And so if you are not stealing, but leaning on other aspects that really define what another class does, then you run the fear of everything kind of feeling a little bit samey or everyone feeling like they have a response to this or they can solve this problem. And I think making the bard almost like a sub healer or really even like a half healer because now its two main abilities function around also being able to heal, that's a little odd to me. I don't think it's insane, but I think it does kind of step on the toes of some other stuff. Like again, if it was a like a healing word bard or something, like a specific subclass, I'd be more okay with it. But because every single bard's gonna get it, I think it might not fit all the bard archetypes or like appearances. So that's one thing I'm not a huge fan of seeing with a few of the different changes to the classes.
I think I will be more than okay with it if it leads to two outcomes in particular. The first being that if they manage to make healing something that is spread out such that there's not a cleric subclass or even just the cleric in general that's getting hammered by everybody else at the table, like, heal me, bro.
Mm-hmm.
If they can put an end to that or even just make a dent in it, I think that would be worthwhile. And just shift either the healing ability, like the healing responsibility, over multiple party members who happen to bring these particular classes, or if you can just say as a group, like, if one of us could play a bard or a cleric or whatever the other classes end up being with this ability. Um, because when I first started playing, it was such a big deal to have a cleric for healing that the DM at the time, if nobody brought one, would give us an NPC cleric.
Mm-hmm.
Because in his view, it was, now this was in a different edition of the game, but then fifth. But his view was you can't play the game without a healer and have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so if this avoids that or dilutes that, I think it could be worth it. Also, the second thing is I think it can work thematically if you lean into hit points as being a measurement of your heroism and not your health.
Yeah.
Where now it makes a little more sense that the bard who is inspirational and encouraging is keeping your spirits up and keeping you mentally in the fight,
Hmm.
as opposed to, well, I got slashed by a sword and then the bard sang David Bowie at me and it closed up. Like that, I've always hated that. Like that's one
Hmm.
thing I've always hated about the bard is like this jokey, dumb, I said a mean thing to you and it actually harmed you physically. That's stupid.
Hmm.
It's just I've never liked that, and
Hmm.
so I think that if you can lean in the direction of flavoring hit points as being your will to be in the fight or your ability to avoid that actual mortal blow, then it starts to make more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would have to Wizards of the Coast would have to almost like announce that that is a new direction, because otherwise, I think the community is never going to get behind that. But one thing that you reminded me of is Bardic Inspiration is actually really different, which is really interesting, and I kind of love it and hate it at the same time. It now being a reaction instead of a bonus action is interesting. There's a lot of different things that kind of stem off of that. Also, it is no longer something you cast and then they can use within 10 minutes. You cast it on their roll. So if they roll something and it looks bad, you then give them Bardic Inspiration at that exact moment. I think the only thing I dislike about that is it kind of ruins at least my thematic mindset of what a bard looks like, because what I'm picturing is someone's trying to do some incredible feat and they're in the middle of it. And yeah, the bard could be sitting there like plucking the strings away while they're doing it, but it's strange that they roll for it and then get inspired. It always made more sense in my mind that you inspire your friends before you go into battle or before they perform some feat and then rely on that down the road. But yeah, I think it's interesting change and I really want to see how it actually plays out in a game. One fear is it might turn into like, oh wait, I'll give you like Bardic Inspiration and no one will ever fail anything. Like that's one thing that kind of comes up occasionally. But yeah, I overall thought that was a curious change. Did you look into that at all?
Well, it's still a limited resource, right?
Hmm.
So
It is proficiency modifier instead of charisma modifier now, which is also an interesting change. So now every bard is going to have this many at this level and this many at this level, where previously you could have had a very charismatic bard who had a lot of inspiration, or a kind of shit bard with not too much inspiration. I think that's something they're kind of losing by doing this.
well, it opens the door to new interpretations, right?
Hmm.
One of the things I always enjoyed about the bard as a concept is how people would say, my the bard that I played was not a lute playing dandy. He was a scald
Hmm.
or, a chanter or something like that.
Gymnast or something, yeah.
Yeah, and so it opens the door to other interpretations of how they do what they do, how they fill that role. Sort of
Hmm.
like how we've talked in the past about how you could have strength intimidation instead
Hmm.
of charisma intimidation.
Hmm.
This is an even broader maybe example of that idea. So
Hmm.
now you could be a bard with a high strength, and strength is your highest stat, or con is your highest stat instead of charisma, because aside from these base abilities like inspiration dice, you really want to be serving this other role too.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's interesting to have the option at least, and anything that makes it more active, like it's something that you are doing. This was something that made a lot of sense to me that Crawford said was, as opposed to giving somebody a die that they forget they have and it's now the onus is back on you instead of
Mhm.
saying, well, I'm going to give you this die, use it when you need it.
Mhm.
You're in the driver's seat again, which makes a lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
Um, it is more, it's better for the game mechanically than uh, narratively, because I think to make it make sense, you are sort of having to describe it as like a retcon of the last 6 seconds.
Yeah.
So like it's not, in my mind, it wouldn't be that the character failed and then the bard made them not fail. It's that it happened simultaneously so that the
Mhm.
failure never actually occurred.
Mhm.
There again, just to avoid this weird goofiness of I sang the problem away. Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's inoffensive to me, I guess I'll say.
it's one of those things that I'm interested to see how it plays out in like a live play versus like trying to theorize about over and over again. Like it will be interesting to see that. But one of the broader topics I'm curious where you land on is I'm slightly concerned about all of the classes getting power creep, where everybody is being updated to be more and more powerful to meet the like the new subclasses and the new classes that they added and the new races that they've added. That these old things are being revamped and they are being brought back up to the level to be even with everyone else. But while doing that, they're also just making everybody more powerful in general, and I think that's fine if you kind of play this like insanely heroic, like, you know, these like the party in the game, or there's these like otherworldly beings that are just insanely gifted. But if you're trying to play a more down to earth game, I think it's going to be harder and harder to justify why these people are even remotely close to human beings, because they get really powerful very fast now. And I don't know, that could be something that might happen where 6th edition everyone's superheroes versus the older editions where it was a bit more of a slower progression.
Going to reserve judgment until we see some examples of the other classes,
Mhm.
because I think that in this packet they made the ranger stop sucking, and they described the rogue as being pretty close in ability to the 5e 2014 rogue, which I
Mhm.
think I would basically agree with. And in terms of the bard, it's hard for me to say because I have not played a bard. My impression of them has always been pretty poor. Um,
On
so I'll
paper, the Bard looks a lot more powerful in this UA. Like, they've added so many more things that it just gets outside of a subclass, and it has like 4 expertise or 5 expertise by the time it's like level 8 or 10. I'll have to look it up, but it has a very broad skill set, like pretty early on, which it kind of plays into what a bard is, but also like, I don't know, it seems like a lot.
Yeah, and they, for what it's worth, he did caution that the power levels. I think it even says it in the document. Like, we know that these classes are strong, and that is subject to change.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm not too worried about it yet, is what I'll say. Let's
Mhm.
let's see what they do to other classes, and for myself, classes that I've spent more time with, like wizard or paladin. Um, but so far so good for me. The ranger needed help. Everybody knew it,
Yeah.
and that's the class of the three that got the biggest boost by far.
Mhm.
So they seem to understand what the ranger needed, and yeah, I'm not, just based on this packet, I'm not too worried, or I'm not finding too much to really pick on.
Mhm. Another thing that I thought was really cool that I think is overall going to be a net benefit for the game is they've started making kind of like categories or organizing terms for various parts of the game, where we now have very distinct lists of spells that are broken down. And was it primal, divine, and something else arcane? Am I getting that right? I think that's
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah, and then we now have classes that are, again, I don't have these written down, but like warrior and expert and other things. Um,
priest is one that he mentioned, which I
mhm,
think is interesting. I'll be
mhm.
curious to see like where paladin lands. Is that
Mhm.
going to be in warrior or in priest?
So it's
I know where
cool
I would
that,
put it, but
yeah, we now have these like defining terms that I think is going to make it easier to either make rulings a bit more general or to describe things to newer players or just help keep things separate and organized. Like I enjoyed that. I think that's actually a really good thing. Um yeah, I don't really see any problem with it, so that's cool. I appreciate that at least.
I think it's smart, and you could see them. You could see them starting to think about this idea with the sidekick rules that came out, um, which more people should use, in my opinion. But that they did something similar in that, where the sidekicks were the expert, the warrior, and I think I don't remember whether they called it mage or magic user or spellcaster, but it was a broader term.
Mhm.
Um, and so you could see them thinking about this idea at that time, and now I think it's really smart to use it in this way, um, because it does open the door to targeting feats and abilities in expansion books at groups of classes.
Mhm.
Something that you see throughout Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and I think maybe Xanathar's as well, is when you're paging through the feats, they have a lot of you must be a sorcerer, must be a warlock,
Mhm.
uh, and this is a good way to address that and to prevent weirdness as they want to add classes later or subclasses.
Mhm.
So I like that a lot, and I like that it, especially if you're a newer player or you're a player that doesn't want to do a lot of theory crafting, that it gives you a sense of where you belong mechanically.
One other thing that you mentioned that I think is really, or I'm kind of mentioned that I really think is cool is we now have confirmed level feats, and you can now take multiple feats multiple times, which is really interesting. I actually really like that. And I took a gander at some of the ones they put in there, and that's cool. We also have epic boons now, which is a whole other thing. Um, but yeah, I like that direction. I think that's an overall good, so that would be cool.
This is a good point to mention that they talked about how classes get their capstone at level 18
Hmm.
instead of level 20, and you
Hmm.
get your first epic boon feat at level 20 instead. And I'm not sure if we mentioned this while the camera was running or if we talked about it as we were getting ready.
Hmm.
Um, but they also want to normalize the progression of subclasses so that everyone can expect to get something at particular levels no matter what class they've taken. And I
Hmm.
think that that is nice as well. That makes a lot more intuitive sense. But talking specifically about getting your capstone at 18 and about smoothing out the progression of classes, I think that, again, barring what ends up in the actual book 2 years from now, this is a great way to cut back on multi-classing. I am not a particular fan of multi-classing. I don't like it. It's messy for one thing. In my opinion, it's hard to do well. Like it's hard to do correctly without doing something cookie cutter. And the issue with multi-classing is that it front loads a character, I think. Like there's a curve, there's a band where where that character will be way more powerful at level 8 or 10 or 12 than the straight class characters, but then would in theory run out of steam
Hmm.
as the other characters are getting their high level abilities and their capstones, and the multi-class character will never reach those levels.
Hmm.
But that's less of a problem, at least in 5e, because very few games make it to that level.
Hmm.
That's why people like multi-classing as much as they do, is it dumps this wheelbarrow of powerful abilities on you for that band in the middle tiers of the game that you get to play with.
Hmm.
And I like the idea of that kind of getting pushed to the side, pushed out of the way. You know, your capstone is going to come earlier, but not so much earlier that now you're just going to do 10 levels in 2 different classes and get 2
Hmm.
capstones. Trying to encourage people to get to those higher levels. They're trying to emphasize those higher levels more, which I'm a big fan of doing. I think that I think the typical D&D group for never getting to those high levels, there's basically a whole piece of the game that you're just never playing.
Hmm.
And that's a shame.
I think where 5e is right now, it's difficult for me to understand why you feel the need to multi-class. There are so many subclasses that get so specialized and so focused on like very unique like situations and feelings, right? Like if you want to play this certain kind of rogue and you feel like you have to dip into fighter or barbarian for it, there is certainly a subclass for it. Like that's kind of where I'm at with it. Or there's a way that you could add a feed or flavor it in some way versus like actually somewhat gimping yourself by multi-classing. But I get the appeal that you almost feel like you're cheating the system. You're like, oh well, I'm going that extra mile, so I'm smart, I'm clever, I got this all figured out. But I think overall, that's not what this game is about, or at least that's not how I play this game or kind of like get my enjoyment out of it. I'm not one to sit there and like figure out all the numbers and the mathematical probability of my guy dishing out the most damage. It's like I care more about who the character is and what we do in the actual game. Um, so yeah, I've never been one to really hyper focus on higher level play or multi-classing or trying to be really exact about that stuff. But I'd be more open to higher level play being more normalized. That would be cool. But it is really difficult to run. Like it actually is. So unless they find a easy way to approach that, I feel like that's probably going to stay somewhat the same. So,
think I think that the way that we'll see, first, to restate a point that I think I already made, the popularity of multiclassing would decrease if more groups made it to tier 4
mm-hmm.
play.
Yeah.
That's my gut
Mm-hmm.
feeling. And second, our first clues about how running high level play might be in OneDnD will come when there is a packet that has some monster stat blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's one of the things that makes it difficult to run is if you're going to do it well, you have to actually understand your players' classes and the abilities that they have and what the counters are in the monster manual to those. You have
Mm-hmm.
to know it. Uh, you can wing low level play pretty easily. Like I threw a handful of goblins at him and it was a fun night.
Mm-hmm.
But at high levels, you've got to have your homework done.
There's so many aces that the players can just slap down, and then the whole encounter is turned on its head. And it's like, well, if you didn't prep for that one, then you're gonna have a rough time. So I think, yeah, that's ultimately why high play is avoided. And I don't know if making that more accessible is gonna cause more people to play it. I mean, I think it will cause more people to try it, but I think long term, it's probably still gonna suffer the same fate.
I wonder if we're going to see some echoes of fourth edition in so much as maybe the monsters will also have, what's the opposite of a subclass or a sub tier?
Um,
Uh, like they will also have a hierarchy where they can be grouped
mm.
by expert or warrior.
Oh, so they have like built-in counters, or they're like built for specific situations of some sort.
So something in 4th E, as I recall, is that it was very, very obvious. This is a ranged damage dealing
Hmm.
character. This is a controller. This is a blaster. This is this.
Hmm.
This is that.
Like categories or defining terms or something.
And so they're sort of bringing it back without bringing it back if they are grouping classes and possibly monsters or enemies or whatever you want to call it in this way, so that if you're building an encounter, you can think to yourself, well, I don't know exactly what I want yet, but I know that I want this many experts and this many priests.
That would be interesting. Yeah. Hmm. I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I'm a lot more curious for future packets now than I was.
Mm-mm.
Uh this was a good one. There's some stuff to chew on in here.
One thing that I don't think we've mentioned yet is, God, I wish this was the first packet they released. My opinion on OneDnD would be so different if this was their first foot out the door. Like, the first packet we got was just, it was so confusing, and there was nothing to really even playtest, and it was almost contradicting things they were claiming in their videos. This at least gives you like actual content that you can use and like put in a game and go all the way to 20 with it, or plug into your current game. Like, it gave you stuff that you could actually play with, which is cool. And I so wish this was the first one they released and not the second, but for whatever reason it is. But it has certainly made me a bit more optimistic about what we're going to be getting down the road.
It also has given us more real clues about what backward compatibility
Mhm.
might mean,
Mhm.
which I find very interesting. Um, I think that first, what we can say pretty definitively is that the base classes from 5e will be obsolete.
Yeah.
They're done. You're not going to play the 5e version of anything in 1D&D in terms of base classes. But one thing that Crawford said as just kind of a throwaway sentence that stuck out for me is, oh, in this packet, we have an explanation about how you could try other bard subclasses on this new bard.
Mhm.
And so that tells me that there's at least the possibility, not that you would ever bring the 5e rogue into the 1D&D game, but if there was a 5e subclass of rogue that you really loved and that they haven't updated yet, there might be a rule of thumb for how to bring that forward and stick it on the 1D&D rogue or whatever.
I wonder if that's going to be their overall approach, where they slowly go back and update the things from start to finish. And then as they're doing so, they go, hey, if we haven't gotten to something yet, go pull it from 5e. We'll get to it eventually. Like, I wonder if that's their kind of systematic approach.
If they're doing it for the bard subclasses in this UA, then I don't know. They've had that thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've tried to address that problem in one instance.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems pretty natural to me to think, like, have a paragraph in the 1D&D player's handbook, or even in the DMG for 1D&D if it's too esoteric for the player's handbook, on converting a 5e subclass for 1D&D. You know,
And
you
also,
should.
it gives Wizard of the Coast a chance to let their 5e content still last a bit longer, which I'm sure they're interested in,
Yeah.
while also being able to be producing content for 1D&D, and we'll
Hell,
see.
I'm interested in the 5e content lasting because I've spent some money on that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't, you know, I know myself. I know that when it
Mhm.
comes out, that's what I'm going to want to play. It's going to be
Mhm.
very hard to feel as good about 5e once 1D&D hits the bookshelf. It's shallow, it's materialistic. I don't care.
I
Uh,
wonder if that's part of the reason they are doing this strange addition, not addition thing. Like, obviously, I think the main point is they're trying to have their cake and eat it too by selling 5e stuff while making new content. But I wonder if it's also to help, like, curb people feeling like that sunk cost fallacy. Like, I wonder if that's actually something they really are trying to combat with this. That's curious.
the, the reason that edition wars happen The reason that console wars in video games happen, the reason that people go all red team, green team in graphics cards for PC, the reason that happens is because most people have limited money. That's the only reason. You have to justify to yourself, you have to tell yourself, I got the best one.
Mm-hmm.
So that you don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why. That's the only reason.
I don't know if that would be the only reason, but I think it's a
If
big one.
if money was no object, every household would have a PlayStation and an Xbox and a Nintendo and a
Mm-hmm.
gaming PC. Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody, if it was Star Trek and they just popped out of a microwave in your wall, nobody would say like, "Well, just gonna play the Nintendo. All those others suck." Like that wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And Edition Wars, I think, are very similar. Like the strife and anxiety around a new edition, a lot of it stems from, gosh, now I'm realizing how many hundreds of dollars I've spent on books for the edition that's about to be obsolete.
I'm gonna have to do it all over again if I want to be up to date.
Exactly. Now I have to
Yeah.
start all over, and nobody's gonna want these old books, so I can't sell them on eBay or take them to the
Mm-hmm.
used bookstore. They don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
That is painful, and uh, I think that it would be a consumer friendly move, as well as potentially good for their bottom line if they could find a way to keep some of these older books somewhat relevant.
I still wish they would call it D&D 5.5 or something. I think that's just a way easier way of explaining it. This whole OneDnD thing is odd, but whatever.
Well, I don't think they committed to this as the name, because remember 5e used to be D&D Next.
That is true, and it sounds more like OneDnD is like their newest push, like it's their newest wave, because it's also
Logan.
kind of including the virtual tabletop as well. So
Yeah.
maybe OneDnD is just like the banner they're putting forth, and it won't be called that down the road. Maybe. There's probably something there. Yeah.
What's next?
The only other thing that I have to mention is skills resetting on initiative. Thought that was cool. That's going to be something interesting to play with. The only potential fear I could see is if you have a particularly problematic group, if they're like, okay, if we sneak out of this combat and roll another initiative, I can reset all my abilities. But I think that's kind of like trying to be an ass, so I don't think that'd be too much of a problem. But that's a cool shift that like I haven't really even come into contact with in 5e as far as I'm aware.
Not in 5e. The closest thing I think that comes to it is the recharge ability that some monsters have, like a dragon's breath
Mhm.
recharges on a 5 and 6 on a d6.
Did
But
3
that's not based on initiative. This is more of an echo again of 4th edition, which I
Mhm.
think is something that we're all kind of avoiding saying because 4th edition is controversial,
Mhm.
but it's another way of thinking about the encounter powers from 4th edition.
Mhm.
So instead of saying you can do this once per encounter, you say this resets on a new initiative.
Yeah.
But it's basically the same idea.
Mhm.
And um on its face, I also think that it's kind of cool. It's gives you more to think about other than all right, do I Nova in this fight or the next one?
Mhm.
Uh I'm kind of I kind of hope I'm not basing this on anything scientific, but I sort of hope that it's only certain classes or categories of classes that really get a lot of these. Because it kind of feels like more of an expert or martial warrior
Yeah.
thing
Mhm.
than a wizard thing.
Yeah, I think one thing that could really come out of this is, well, the community thinks there's this huge discrepancy between casters and martial, and I think most people understand that it really is addressed by running your encounters with the right, separations and resets and that kind of thing. But this could also be a nice way of the actual game designers having a very cut and dry idea of what a martial class has going into each combat versus going into each adventuring day. And that allows them so much more room to know precisely how balanced this person should be at this exact moment. So I think that's ultimately why this is being included. I could be wrong, but that would be a very direct way to help confront the discrepancy between casters and martial users. So yeah, we'll see that maybe. So
This is a good topic for another video sometime in the future, but I think that a lot of the things, let's just say many of the things that are perceived as being faults of D&D are faults with how your table's playing.
yeah.
It's something you need to either think about yourself or take up with your DM, because not all tables have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the discrepancy between marshals and casters is one of those. If you're finding that at your table, that's something your DM could fix if they put some thought into it, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's a story for another time.
Mm-hmm.
Something that they're doing in this packet are there are a number of things that actually exist in 5e already. And all they're doing in this playtest material is clarifying the language or
Mm-hmm.
slapping a vocabulary term on it so that it's sort of highlighted, and you, when you read it, you understand and sort of slot it in somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it is less, it's more obvious, right? The things, what they did with light weapons and two weapon fighting, what they did with the study action,
Mm-hmm.
that's not new for OneDnD. It's just now that they're calling it a word in particular
Mm-hmm.
and taking away some of that ambiguity. I think that the ambiguity is sometimes one of the strengths of 5e if your table is
Mature.
quick enough on their feet.
Yeah.
But in OneDnD, they're sort of saying like, all right, we want to make sure that you understand that this is what this is. So
I
it's
bet you money that like any editor or any author that worked on 5e has like one rule that they constantly run into that are like, oh, I wish we would have worded that differently. Oh, that was just so bad, that they are taking this opportunity to address pretty directly. So
yeah.
yeah.
I would go so far as to say that in this latest set of videos, Crawford all but comes out and says
Mm,
almost exactly that.
yeah.
That they're making these changes because they understand that those are sticking points in the previous edition.
Mhm.
Um, and when a lot of these changes are just, we added a word. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. Anything else you got, sir?
There was a lot of information in this packet, and if we
Mhm.
were dirtier dirtbags, then we could crank out like a bunch of 10-minute videos where we're like, new Ranger breakdown. Uh,
Yeah, there's so many videos of people just like reading the last playtest article. It's like, really? I mean, I know that people will click on that, but it's like just fucking read the article.
we're throwing a little shade here, but we're showing you our discussion,
Mhm.
not just rereading and restating everything that
Mhm.
was put out by the Dungeons Dragons YouTube channel. And anyway, what I was saying is that I'm sure that I'm gonna wake up tomorrow morning like, oh wait, I didn't think of that last night.
Mhm.
But we'll see if people enjoy this conversation. Then there's definitely more there to take
Mhm.
uh, stock of and to talk about.
But the new survey is coming out on the 20th of October, so we got some time to munch over this one.
And we need it.
Yeah.
There's a lot more in this one than that first packet.
Yeah. I mean, so I
But also
think
there's more in it that I actually am interested to try. Like there's more in it that I'm interested to play test than the first packet. In fact,
Yeah.
I think that we're going to use the UA guidance spell in the game that we're playing right now.
Okay.
Um, because it makes sense. Um, makes more sense than the old guidance.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we certainly could make a different natural two on each class in this UA. We certainly have enough back and forth to talk about those things. But overall, it does kind of feel like this is a little too much for once. I think it would have been just as appealing if they released just all the new feats or just like one class at a time, and then had shorter periods of feedback, like a bit more kind of focused releases of content. Though I'm not gonna, you know, disapprove of what we got this time because it is a lot better than what we got last time. So yeah, but we could definitely make more content on that. And that's something you're interested in, then let us know down below. But by all means, I could understand if you're tired of hearing about OneDnD because it can get a little bit overbearing at times in our community. So
I will say it's a little unfortunate that you've only got less than a month before the survey opens
mhm.
to playtest something, because that unless your group is playtesting first and playing D&D second,
Mhm.
that's you're biasing the respondents of that survey to be kind of the hardest of the hardcore, which is maybe unfortunate,
Yeah, there's
because
like no
there are
way a
groups that
group. Yeah.
are only going to play one time
Mhm.
between now and then, and I always feel sorry for those people. But yeah, man, that's kind of a quick turnaround.
But like if you took one group and said, I want you to playtest this from level 1 to 20, like that's like a year or two. Like that's like an incredible amount of time for most groups. And so to say, hey, here's three different classes from level 1 to 20 and play test them, that is kind of a broad ask that is, I don't think, going to be handled appropriately, but it's better than nothing. I mean, so I'll take that. So,
Yeah, not to look a gift horse in the mouth. It's
mhm.
just I wonder who those groups are that are really interested in playtesting, uh, and putting in that honest effort.
This might be
What
a
their sessions look like, what their friend group looks like.
this might be a bit of a hot take, but I suspect that Wizards of the Coast is more interested in what like the internet community of D&D says about OneDnD versus what the actual players say about OneDnD. I think they're a little more concerned about their image or how the community perceives them versus how their game actually plays. So,
No, I get the sense from Crawford that he's like, at the very least, and he's the
mhm.
grand poobah over there. They seem genuinely excited about the the things that he was presenting in these recent videos.
Well, perhaps I'll
Uh,
change my statement. Maybe it is the designers are really interested in crafting the perfect game, but maybe like the marketing or the corporate overhead is trying to condense this in an unrealistic time period or attempting to appeal to more of a seller's base than the actual player base. That might be kind of the dynamic we're dealing with.
I could see also if the designers already sort of decided amongst themselves, like, this new rule is gonna be in the book
Hmm.
unless it absolutely crashes and burns in the community. But
Hmm.
we think we know what we're doing, and we think that we know best.
Yeah,
So,
I can see that too.
sort of like how in politics, it's like, well, we technically had a comment period for this rule change,
Hmm.
but it ended 2 hours ago, so screw you.
Yeah, yeah. But overall, after this, I am a lot more optimistic about OneDnD than I was previously. So that's something.
I'd agree with that for sure.
Hmm.
And tell us in the comments what your opinion is now, whether you feel better about it. And if you're playtesting, I'm curious to know. I'm curious to hear about that.
Hmm.
So throw that in the comments too.
That was one thing they include in the survey is have you play tested this material on every single question? So at least they're asking.
Yeah. And I would like to be a fly on the wall as they're going over those results for how many responses they got of, no, I didn't play test it, but it's
Mhm.
crap anyway.
Do you think they're ever going to release that? Probably not.
Oh, heck no. No, no, no.
That would be so
I,
interesting to see, though.
I just want, and I wonder how they regard that. Like, is that data to them or
I mean, it
does it
must
get
be.
weighted differently?
Yeah, yeah. That's over my head, I'm sure.
There's an aspect of this also that's sort of, you don't want to see how the sausage is made. Like
Yeah.
there's as much as I really kind of respect what they're doing and sort of have a new respect for watching Jeremy Crawford describe these things. There was a moment when he called like a feat or a character ability tasty that I was like, I don't want to follow this anymore. I'm just gonna wait until the book comes out.
Oh, this is the feat that he described as scrumptious. I can't use
Yeah.
this now.
Uh, it's almost like it's like, man, I thought this album was cool, and then I found out my dad listens to it. Now
There
I
you
can't
go.
listen to it anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. That stuff doesn't really get to me. I think more than anything, it's a genuine intent behind the content creators or the game designers. Like that is more what I'm interested in. And sometimes you can't really get a good feeling of what that is, but that was my main fear with OneDnD when we first heard about it, and now it's a bit more open. I think, yeah, I'm enjoying some of the talks they have. I think their most recent interviews are a lot more clear than their first ones, which I'm enjoying. Um, so yeah, I'm hopeful for the next one and crossing my fingers that it doesn't disappoint me or push me in the other direction. So.
I will say that, and maybe this is like a tease or a hint for a video that maybe we will or won't do between now and the next UA packet. But this Ranger has made me interested to play a Ranger for the first time in my entire history with D&D
Mm-hmm.
since 3.5. I have never cared about Rangers until now. So hats off to them for that alone. Um, to me, the Ranger was always that class that, like, as a newcomer to the game, particularly thinking, "Oh, this is gonna be this image. This is gonna be Strider, or this is gonna be this other cool idea that I have in my head," and then looking at the
Mm-hmm.
rules and thinking, "This is this is just a bard that fights a little gooder." I
Mm-hmm.
don't I don't. This is not where I can get my kicks. I'm gonna go play a fighter.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of people that second that opinion.
And if you're one of them, or if you're not one of them, like and subscribe
There it is. Yep.
for more things that you will either agree or disagree with.
Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that I wish to get most out of these like natural two discussions. Like I enjoy throwing things back and forth with you, but it is also interesting to see what the community generally thinks about these things and their input and feedback because sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's insightful. I enjoy both. So
Yeah. Zeitgeist. Give it to me.
but yeah, I think that is our broad stroke coverage of the second UA packet for OneDnD and our very intellectual commentary on it. And we will either see when the next one comes out or if there is requests for more detailed analysis of the classes in this one. So, anything you got parting words, sir?
I just want to point out that this is some natural 2 after dark right now. Like
Yeah,
we are
it's late.
recording this. We're recording this at night.
Hmm.
Uh Everybody else in my house has gone to bed. I'm going to bed right after this because of our dedication. Okay, the blood and the sweat that we, mostly Nathan, but sometimes also me, is putting into this.
Mm-hmm.
So
That
all you gotta
alone
do,
deserves a like and subscribe.
all you gotta do is click a button,
Mhm.
okay? And you don't even have to stay up late to do it.
But if you are up late, you also have the ability to press the button. So
Do it for my wife, who I'm probably gonna wake up when I try to sneak into bed in a few minutes. Click that thumbs up for her.
all right, to put a cease to our e-begging, and we'll call that a show, sir.
Until next time.